morning we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 2, Text 14. Is that right? 14? Yavanna jayeta pare varesmin Vishveshvare drastari bhakti yoga Avat stavya purusasya rupam Kriya vasane prayata smareta Yavat, as long as. Na, does not. Jayeta, develop. Para, transcendental. Avare, mundane. Asmin, in this form of. Vishva, Ishvare, the Lord of all worlds. Drastari, under the seer. Bhakti Yoga, devotional service. Tavat, so long. Staviya, the gross materialist. Purusasya, of the Virat Purusha. Rupam, universal form. Kriya avasane, at the end of one's prescribed duties. Prayata, with proper attention. Smareta, one should remember. Favourable, just close this sliding door in the back. Purport. Translation. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service under the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. Translation, please repeat. Unless the gross materialist develops a sense of loving service under the Supreme Lord, the seer of both the transcendental and material worlds, he should remember or meditate upon the universal form of the Lord at the end of his prescribed duties. Purport. Supreme Lord is the seer of all worlds, both material and transcendental. In other words, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate beneficiary and enjoyer of all worlds, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 5.29. Spiritual world is the manifestation of his internal potency, and the material world is the manifestation of his external potency. The living entities are also his marginal potency. And by their own choice, they can live in either the transcendental or material worlds. The material world is not a fit place for living entities because they are spiritually one with the Lord, and in the material world, the living entities become conditioned by the laws of the material world. The Lord wants all living entities who are his parts and parcels to live with him in the transcendental world, and for enlightening conditioned souls in the material world, all the Vedas and the revealed scriptures are there, expressly to recall the conditioned souls back home, back to Godhead. Unfortunately, the conditioned living entities, although suffering continually the threefold miseries of conditioned life, are not very serious about going back to Godhead. It is due to their misguided way of living, complicated by sins and virtues. Some of them who are virtuous by deeds begin to re-establish the lost relation with the Lord, but they are unable to understand the personal feature of the Lord. The real purpose of life is to make contact with the Lord and be engaged in his service. That is the natural position of the living entities. But those who are impersonalists and unable to render any loving service to the Lord have been advised to meditate upon his impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa or universal form. Some way or other, one must try to re-establish one's forgotten relation with the Lord. One's forgotten relation with the Lord, if one at all desires to gain real happiness in life and to reclaim his natural, unfettered condition. For the less intelligent beginners, meditation on the impersonal feature, the Virat Rupa, or universal form of the Lord will gradually qualify one to rise to personal contact. One is advised herewith to meditate upon the Virat Rupa specified in the previous chapters in order to understand how the different planets, seas, mountains, rivers, birds, beasts, human beings, demigods, and all that we can conceive are but different parts and limbs of the Lord's Virat form. This sort of thinking is also a type of meditation on the absolute truth, and as soon as such meditation begins, one develops one's godly qualities, and the whole world appears to be a happy and peaceful residence for all the people of the world. Without such meditation on God, either personal or impersonal, all good qualities of the human being become covered with misconceptions regarding his constitutional position, and without such advanced knowledge, the whole world becomes a hell for the human being. So continuing on in this chapter, The Lord in the Heart, Sukadeva Goswami is stressing on the same points, bringing up different nuances and different, more elaborate explanations, so on. Now, Prabhupada in the beginning of his purport more or less sums up the whole situation very succinctly of the living entity, and not only the living entity, but of the Supreme Personality of God. He is the seer of the worlds. He's the knower. He knows all, both material and transcendental. So Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of God, knows this world, knows beyond this world. And Prabhupada quotes from or mentions Bhagavad Gita 5:29, where Bhuktaram Jagatapa Sam Savalokam Aishwaram Suridam Savutaram Katmamam Santim Richati, very famous verse from Bhagavad Gita. And actually he would often refer to this verse as the peace formula. This is the peace formula. If one understands this verse and comes to this level of consciousness, then this is the true peace formula for the world. And what is it? A person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerity, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of the material miseries. So this shanti, this word, Gatmamam shantim richtati, one wants peace. Now, Prabhupada uses, Prabhupada, all the acharyas use words very carefully and scrutinizing the actual meaning. For example, here, the use of the word parts and parcels. There is the Supreme Lord, there is the energy, Bharyanga Shakti, the external energy, Antaranga, the internal energy, Tatastha Shakti, that's the marginal, that's you and I. We can live in the material or we can live in the spiritual. And he goes on to say that it is their choice, by their own choice, the living entities, we can live in either the transcendental material worlds, so it's our choice, but this material world is not a fit place for the living entities because they are spiritually one with the Lord, and in the material world living entities become conditioned. Now, the Lord wants all living entities who are his parts and parcels. I remember early on when I was a devotee, I was always wondering about this parts and parcels. What is this, parts and parcels? Parts and parcels, okay. And I remember I looked it up way back then. It's actually an old legal term, English legal term, which means that in law, it means there are parts and there are parcels. It has several meanings, but it means that the parcels are complete in themselves, but they're integral. They're part of the whole, and the whole, and they're integral to the whole. They are meant to be part of the whole. You can't separate them. In law, this was a position that if someone were presenting something in law, someone might try to separate that from the actual situation, but lawyers would often argue, no, it's part and parcel. It's connected. It cannot be. You cannot separate and argue on that. in itself, by itself, of itself. You cannot do that because it's part and parcel. So there are many who try to separate the living entities from the Supreme. There is no Supreme there. But these words are carefully chosen by the Acharyas. No, parts and parcel, integral. You can't separate it. We're parts of this. We're not different. We are parts of them, but we are parcels. We've got our own identity, but we're integral in the whole, in the connection. In the connection. So Prabhupada uses this term, parts and parcels. The living entities are parts and parcels. This is our position. We're marginal. We can be in the material world or the spiritual, but we're eternally connected in some way or other. And unfortunately, we become conditioned. Now, Prabhupada uses this term also, fettered, unfettered. Also a very carefully thought about word, because fettered, if you look up fettered, it actually means, it can mean either physically restricted or restrained, even by shackles. You know, sometimes this is used. The prisoner is brought to the court, fettered with chains, generally around the ankles. They're marched in. I don't know, you see so much this in Australia, but I don't know in America they kind of march them in. They're in chains. So they're fettered by chains. So it can be literally someone is actually chained up, or metaphorically one is by rules and regulations, you're fettered. Just like you live at home, and if you want to live at home with your parents, there are certain rules and regulations. If you want to live here, you have to live according to these rules. So then you're fettered, you're restricted, you're restrained by your situation. But so Prabhupada is saying here that the living entity, the conditioned soul, is in a fettered condition. Now, so many things in the world are restricting us, but ultimately our own bodies and material body is restricting us. It's limiting our unfettered, and Prabhupada uses the word unfettered. So there's fettered as unfettered. It is limiting our true potential, our true position. We're limited by this body. Limited by so many things, but ultimately by this body, which is both gross and subtle. And so we can't do so many things because of this body. But the spirit soul is not like that. It is unfettered, and especially conditioned by the modes of material nature. Now, here is also Prabhupada mentions this, that the modes of material nature are conditioning us. We know the sattva gun, the raja gun, and the tama gun. Now, somehow or other, if people... also another thing that is mentioned here is very interesting. He says here, one must try to establish once forgotten, and then he goes on to say this sort of thing is done. As soon as one, engages... he says here, even if one is fettered or restricted by the modes of material nature, and what does he say? And everything becomes very... I'm just trying to find that section here. It is due to the misguided... It is due to their misguided way of living, complicated by sins and virtues, and further restricted and conditioned by the modes of material nature, later on. So people are restricted by the modes of material nature, and also they're misguided. Now, when we're born, we live our life and we're guided in so many ways. Of course, as babies, we're guided by the parents, and we grow up with children. The parents are still there. We go to school, we're guided at school. We grow older, and then we're guided in some. We go to work, we follow so many guidelines and so on and so forth. So our whole life, the governments are guiding us, and so we're taking... But it's not true guidance on the spiritual level. So Prabhupada actually goes so far as to say it's misguided. It's misguided. Everything's focused on the material side of things, and virtually nothing for the spiritual. So it's misguided, and the whole thing becomes complicated by, he puts it this way, sins and virtues. Very interesting. Sins and virtues. So we're guided in a certain way that's very materialistic, and on top of that, we have to get the reactions from former activities. So because one, it can be guided, but then that even if we want to follow those guidelines, it becomes sometimes difficult because of reactions that happen to us. So sins and virtue. So due to the past activities in other lives, we get the karma. So sometimes the karma is putting very heavy things on it. Sometimes we get good results. So all that makes everything complicated. So we're guided. We've got the karma coming, and there's all different levels of karma. Some is parabdha, aparabdha, bija, as is described in Srimad Bhagavatam and other shastras. Bija is just a seed. Some is manifest. Some is happening now. Parabdha. Some is aparabdha. Some is not yet happening. Some is just in the form of the seed, which is just waiting to fructify. And so, we've had so many lives, and we've done so many actions and reactions, and the reactions can't fit all in one life. They can't fit all in one life. They have to go over quite a few lives. So whether they're good or bad, and some are bejas just waiting, they're just seeds. They still haven't come up yet. So, and you go over, thousands of years, and how many lives we've had, and all sorts of species and so on and so forth. So the karma, we're getting some karma, and then how we react to what we get gives us more karma. So there's certain ways to react to it. We get something good, we can, act in a certain way or act in another. Get something bad, we can react to that in one way, we can react to it. So however you react to it will give you more karma. Very, very complicated. Very, very complicated. Karma is so complicated. You need the mind of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or His empowered agents to actually understand it all. It's impossible for ordinary conditioned souls to understand about even their own karma, what to speak of other people's karma. Some people want to sometimes present themselves as understanding the situation. Let me help you. But, okay, well, what about all the karma that's going to happen and so on and so forth. So everything becomes very complicated. Very, very. So one is guided, but here it's put that they're misguided. But on top of that, there's the karma, all these types of things. But of course, Krishna always wants the living entities to be in their natural position in the spiritual world. And unfortunately, with all these complications, misguided, the karma, and then of course the conditioning by the modes of material nature. Now, when one is very much conditioned, especially in Kali Yuga, we find very much conditioned by that what's called the tamagun, the mode of ignorance, then it'll be seen. There are certain symptoms. One will be very lazy, one will be very sleepy, one will be very negative. There are certain things that the tamagun moves. These are energies the energy of the material energy, subsection of the material energy that moves in certain ways. Places, you go to certain places, there's a certain mood to them that affects your consciousness. People, you're with certain type of people, that'll affect your consciousness. So if a place is very negative, and you're with negative people, you'll be very negative. So generally in the mode of ignorance, people are very negative about things and very critical and continuously. Generally this is the situation. Continuously, always critical, because of that negativity. You see, if someone's very negative, they're always going to be critical because they're very negative. And so, the smallest thing becomes the biggest thing. Make a mountain out of a molehill, that old saying. So the smallest thing, because of that negative mentality, that negative attitude, you'll always focus on that and expand it, and exaggerate it. So this is the result. This is very much a symptom of the mode of ignorance, the tamagun. So certain symptoms are given in the Shastra, Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, other Shastras, of those who are in the mode of. So someone whose knowledge can see. So if someone's like this, they like that thing, or they're very much affected by the tamaguna. So unfortunately, with all these other things, misguided, fettered by, misguided by the karma, and then you have the modes, you know, it's very difficult. And I think yesterday Prabhupada in his lecture was talking about, or someone asked a question, he was saying it can be to become Krishna conscious can be very difficult or can be very easy. I think Krishna Kirtan, you asked that question. Very easy if you surrender to Krishna. He is the master of the Maya. I remember I wrote a song once called Krishna, the Master of Maya. And I put it to music, and I had a band and we played it in the band. Master of Maya. Krishna is the master of Maya, yeah, because the someone who's controlling that thing that's controlling everybody else, it's not difficult for that person to just lift the whole thing off. But if you try to do it yourself, virtually impossible. You can't do it. So therefore, simultaneously easy, but simultaneously difficult. So it depends how you go about and trying to elevate yourself. So the mode of ignorance is like that, and the mode of passion, of course, Rajaguna is very strong, and so there are certain symptoms to that as well. Generally, one will be going, will be negative, then they'll be positive, be going up and down like a yo-yo. That's more or less like a mode of passion. Sometimes it'll be like this, sometimes it'll be like that. Even at the next minute, they can change. Mode of passion is driving them. For those who are very much affected by all these things and by the modes of nature, then it is very difficult. But somehow or other, Prabhupada explains, if someone does some good deeds, whether spiritually, well, that's very, very good, or even materially, they do some good deeds. It's a mode of goodness. They dig a well, they make roads, they help people, they feed people. These are charitable activities that are helping others. Even they're on the material platform, not totally spiritual, but because there's no spiritual element perhaps, but still they're good. They're considered good activities, and then with that, there's a mode of goodness. By doing these activities, by helping people, one develops a certain mentality and also comes under more of the sattva guna. Of course, there will always be a mix of passion and ignorance, but one comes, and then when one gets like that, then the the consciousness becomes awakened a little bit more, and one will start to see things in a different way. This is what Prabhupada explains here. One will start, where does he say that somehow or other, some of them are virtuous by deed. Some of them who are virtuous by deed begin to re-establish the lost relation with the Lord, but they are unable to understand the real purpose of life is to make contact with the Lord. I'm just trying to find that part. Somehow or other, one has to develop this, and then one will become more positive in their mentality. And when one becomes more positive, if he begins to see things, but if he is fortunate, one comes in contact with someone who is spiritually advanced, then they begin very nicely on the path of devotional service. Now, here in the Sukadeva Goswami says that unless the gross material develops a sense of loving service unto the Lord, he should meditate on the universal form of the Lord. Now, interestingly enough, as mentioned yesterday, I was saying, Naham Prakasa Savas Yogama Shamabda Mudo Jam Lokomam Ajam Abhyam. The Lord reserves the right to manifest Himself to those who are materially or very sinful, because they cannot appreciate the position of Krishna, nor can they actually appreciate properly their own spiritual position, and what the relationship and developing spiritual relationships in bhakti yoga, in love. So those who are very, very gross materialists, to come immediately to that platform is very difficult for them, and it's not at all recommended that one should advise like that. This is what Prabhupada is explaining here. One should advise them to come like that. Idam te na tapaskaya na bhaktaya kadaya nat chatsusubeva chamnachamyam bhyabhishuyati. In this verse here, those who are not austere or devoted, engaged in devotional service, one who is envious of me, this thing is not the transcendental knowledge is not understandable. Krishna is not very understandable. So here Prabhupada talks about what he says there. One who hasn't undergone austerities, never attempted devotional service in Krishna consciousness, nor who have tended to a pure devotee, he puts it that way, and those who are actually envious of Krishna. So for those types of persons, it's not advisable to explain to them, especially the more intimate levels of Krishna consciousness. The purpose of Bhagavad Gita is not understandable for those who are in this situation. Now, he goes on to say, so someone maybe not so materially engrossed, but they're not practitioners of Krishna consciousness. Even these people, they will find it difficult to understand Krishna. And furthermore, he says that one may pose themselves as a devotee, dress like a devotee, even talk like a devotee, but if they're not actually practitioners, they're not engaging in devotional service, they're not chanting, they're not hearing, they're not. He says here that such a person also, he also cannot understand Krishna. He also cannot understand Krishna. And someone who is very out and out envious of Krishna, someone just, Krishna doesn't manifest to such an envious person because it is not good for them, nor will they be able to understand the more intimate, sweet, spiritual relationships. Just like someone is always very envious, jealous. They're always jealous. How are they going to, someone is always jealous of you. Even if you say something to them, because they're jealous, they're envious of you, they're going to see it in a very critical way. They can't help it, they're jealous, they're envious. And so they'll twist it. They'll twist it and they'll attack. So Krishna, of course Krishna, he's the Supreme Personality. He's not affected by those things. But it's not good for them. It's not good for them to come in like that, and not only of Krishna, but all the devotees of Krishna. Krishna especially doesn't like that. One thing to be envious of him, but if one is envious of the devotees of Krishna, so therefore Krishna doesn't bring them in to that. It's not good for them, and also it spoils the mood of intimate loving relationships. If you're having intimate loving relationship, you're with your friends and there's a very sweet thing, and someone comes in, they're like a dark cloud, they're very critical, they're very in, but comes in and joins in the conversation, kind of going to spoil things a little bit. They're going to start off with some negative things, they're going to attack, the whole nature of the conversation will change. Right? Understand? So those persons can be helped in other ways. Right? So to bring them into the intimate, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would only talk very intimate things about Krishna with certain devotees, even though Lord Chaitanya's associates were very advanced devotees, but as far as intimate discussions about Krishna and Radha and the gopis, he would only talk with a few about those subject matters. So one has to be very careful in presenting Krishna consciousness. One should be mindful who are the different types of persons who are listening. So for those, here Prabhupada goes on about those who are very gross materialists. Better for them to, those who are impersonalists, try to understand the Lord through this Virat Rupa, first, see it all connected. It is kind of an impersonal thing, but it's all connected, all the seas and the mountains and all that. It's all God, the limbs and so on of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The person Krishna, the spiritual personality of Krishna, that comes after purification. So I want us to be very careful in their presentation of Krishna consciousness. And we saw Srila Prabhupada do this very expertly. He could speak nicely to young children at school. He could speak to young people. He could speak to elderly people. He could speak to academics. He could speak to government leaders. He could speak differently, present differently, according to the person who is listening, according to the place. So Prabhupada would make adjustments from time to time. I remember one time when we took Prabhupada out to Lord Trove University to give a lecture. So the devotees had been advertising it. At that time on campus there, the Communist Party was very strong, amongst the students, and so they had a club there, the Communist Party club, and so unbeknownst to us, they had planned, because they are against spirituality and God consciousness, so they had a plan to disrupt the whole thing. Even a plan to, when Prabhupada came, they had some paint they were going to throw all over. They kind of planned that Prabhupada would go out by a certain route, and they had planned to be on top. There's a walk bridge on top of that, and they were going to pour enamel paint, black enamel paint. But Prabhupada somehow or other went out another way. But some of our vans went out that way, and they poured the paint. And we couldn't get that off either, by the way. We had to take it to the panel beater and get it all sanded right back to the, but in the meeting itself, we did the kirtan, and then Prabhupada started. He only said a few sentences, and all of a sudden they had planned this. That people in the crowd, they would jump up and just start shouting over Prabhupada and disrupt the whole thing. So that's what happened. And then when Prabhupada just stopped. And then Madhavisa got up and started to explain, but then they started to shout something at him also. Then Prabhupada just started, I was there, so Prabhupada said, just have kirtan. And so we had a big roaring kirtan and kind of drowned them all out. that was that. But then later on, back at the temple, Prabhupada, in the room, he said that, for these public programs, the main program is kirtan and prasadam. Kirtan, prasadam. Yeah, there was another similar incident in Paris also, same type of thing. And so Prabhupada said the same thing there. Kirtan and prasadam, for the mass of people, only with those who are serious. And I remember at Ratha Yatra also, when Prabhupada came that year in 74, that at the end, Prabhupada gave a very short speech. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating in the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's very short, and then he told everyone to have a look. Those who are interested, go and have a look at some of our books. But the main thing was the kirtan and the prasadam. And so, he even said, here in Australia, he said, your country will be conquered by prasadam. So we were very lucky in this country where we've got so many prasadam restaurants and food for life and so many. And he also said that in the radius of the temple, all the people should be fair. Just you can have an open invitation, whoever wants to come. And and especially he said it there in Melbourne. Aniruddha still has that program even till this day. At every lunch, every lunchtime, and there's an open house at lunchtime. It's sent out, and anyone who wants to come to the temple, they can have prasadam at lunch. That is the main prasadam. Although whoever comes, they give them prasadam, but they especially go out of their way to mention that you can come for lunch. And there's all sorts of people turn up, coming for lunch. So I wanted to be very mindful of these types of instructions. What is the position of the living entities, how they're conditioned, and how to best present Krishna consciousness, and how to best, what advice to give to different types of people. Just like an expert physician won't give the same medicine to everyone. It'll be dependent upon their particular disease. So then he'll give this one, and slightly different for the other one, or completely different for the other one. So we have to be very, very careful how we present Krishna, and these more intimate. So it's very much stressed here for those who are impersonalists, so on and so forth. They don't. All right, just Virat Rupa, even in the Bhagavad Gita, has said that the very engrossed materialist, they're engaging in activities, and one has to be very careful how they talk. One should not talk in such a way that gives rise to them being very angry. That's considered in a subtle way to be an offence on your part. That you spoke in such a way. Of course, some people are so envious. No matter what you're saying, they're going to attack you. But generally, if you speak in such a way that provokes a certain response, then that's one should take lesson about that, how to better say things as to bring about the most effective result, or what's best for the individual. Of course, one learns as they go. Sometimes making mistakes. But anyway, now if one can somehow or other come up and develop the good qualities, as Prabhupada says here, then one can gradually be elevated. Otherwise, he ends, without such advanced knowledge, the whole world becomes a hell for the human being. Hare Krishna. And on that note, I'll finish there. Has anyone got any question? Comment? Yes.
Maharaj, on that point of the Prabhupada choosing the exact word required.
Which one?
Just the general principle of choosing the exact word.
Oh, yeah.
And one time he wrote that this material world is simply pandemonium. And I thought that was a bit of a strange word to use. Usually it's used in a bit of a, light-hearted way. It's a bit confused, chaotic, whatever. But I looked that word up, and it comes from, pandemonium comes from the word pandemoniac, which means the place of the demons.
Place of the?
The demons.
The demons.
Or the demoniac. So I thought that's exactly the right word.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was my point, that the acharyas, very carefully select their words. And I remember Hari Suri told me that there was some disturbance going on, and where Prabhupada was translating, and he sent out a message, that don't do disturbances. He especially didn't like banging doors. In Melbourne, all the doors were banging, bang, 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 and it disturbed because he said that this is a deep meditation. When I'm doing these translation and purports, it's a very deep meditation. And he actually mentioned that every word is considered very carefully. Every word is considered, and he actually got us to put felt strips on the doors. Someone would open the door, bang, and bang. It's like, what did he say? He said, this is like a crack in my heart. Bang, you're in the middle, bang. And we had to be very quiet around, if you were upstairs, wasn't it? Remember this? We had to be very quiet. You couldn't have loud conversations, talking loudly outside Prabhupada's room. The servant had come out, hey, downstairs. Right? I got that a couple of times. So because he liked quiet. It was a deep meditation, the purports and so on and so. So these words, meditate very carefully on these words: pandemonium, unfettered, parts and parcels. These were considered very carefully. There was one. I remember there was a comment by one professor from South India. He said that these purports by Bhaktivedanta Swami, he said that they are so amazing that it must have been Krishna was standing over his shoulder telling him what to write. Anyway, we know that Prabhupada also consulted all the acharyas and so on, and then he was inspired, of course, by Krishna. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Maharaj. Just a little point about Prabhupada and not being disturbed is that very famous story in Mayapur. It was the early hours of the morning, everyone was sleeping, And there used to be a tap, for those who have been to Mayapur, at the bottom of the stairs leading up to Prabhupada's quarters outside, there used to be a tap near the grill. And somehow or other it was drip, drip, drip. Prabhupada's up on the second floor.
Wow.
And he calls his servant, he said, can't you hear that? And Prabhupada could hear that drip, drip. And, you know, he
That's
said
how
so-
focused he was on any outside disturbance.
Yeah. And Prabhupada was always so focused about
And he
not
did-
wasting any of Krishna's energy, like dripping taps.
And he didn't like Krishna's energy wasted either. You know, he would comment about lights being left on. Why are these lights being left on and no one is here? Right, he would comment. Remember about that. Dripping taps, yeah, I mean, yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
I think it was Sri Rupa, I think it was her told this story that she washed Prabhupada's floor in Vrindavan and she'd left the fan on so the floor would dry. So when Prabhupada came back from his morning walk, it wouldn't be wet. And then Prabhupada, when he came in, he could see the fan on and said, who's left this fan on?
Yeah, didn't like things being wasted. All right, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai.